Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Working the Data. We're going to be talking about Databricks and Azure Synapse and how it incorporates into the Microsoft Cloud Data Platform. So our agenda today, pretty straightforward. We'll do some introductions about MDS. Then we'll go into Azure Synapse as a platform. Pat will also take you through integrating the data solutions into Azure Synapse, and then he'll walk you through the solution that he and his team have been working on for the past few weeks. That includes the computer vision analysis. So quickly, who is MDS? We are a 100% business-owned enterprise that was founded in 1994. Currently, we're headquartered in New York City, but we do have branch offices in a few different locations. And we have about 70 plus engineers and technology consultants. We're growing every day. We are not held back by any one industry. We do have capabilities in all different verticals, and we do specialize in healthcare, insurance, real estate, education, public utilities. So here's just a quick snapshot of our partners. As you can see at the top, we do have capabilities for all the 4 major cloud providers, as well as cybersecurity, cloud data center, and retailer providers. So this is just a quick snapshot. We have won some recent awards, especially within the Microsoft space. So we did have some security compliance awards last year. This year, that's supposed to say 2020, but we did win the Bahamas and Jamaica awards for Microsoft. And then this is a Microsoft presentation. So we wanted to show you our competencies. And as you can see, we are a gold partner for data analytics. And then so I'm going to pass this on to Patrick Hall. He will give you the bulk of the presentation.
Thanks, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. We are really thrilled to have you join us for our second installment in our Synapse Summer webinar series. We are excited that you're able to join us after our postponement. Our presentation today, however, delves further into utilizing the Azure Synapse Analytics platform to not only explore, but transform and store your data, but also leveraging this exciting new platform to learn and interpret your enterprise data and provide valuable business insights. Our last presentation, we looked at utilizing Azure Synapse Analytics to drive textual related data from hashtags on Twitter. And today we continue our focus on social media platforms, and we'll look to explore capturing meaningful data from images we've retrieved from Instagram. Now, whether it's textual content or images, our objective during Synapse Summer is to glean some type of information and to supplement organizational decision-making process by looking at various social media platforms. As our first goal during our last installment was to get a sense of feelings or sentiment associated with terms or events or products. This installment is to identify data or content within images. To get a sense about the feelings or perception of those terms or events or objects is key. And this is important to note because gleaning that perception accurately, rapidly, and efficiently is invaluable in our data-driven modern workplace to remain competitive. So as we dive into today's episode, with technology, humans have been interacting with machines for years. So whether it's computers or electronic devices, our daily lives have been immersed with these seemingly mundane interactions. What perpetual intelligence aims to do is for machines to perceive what human beings do around them, helping people make decisions or anticipating their needs. Cognitive technology can understand, reason, and learn. It analyzes thousands of pieces of data and, more importantly, is capable of giving the data meaning by finding and relating them to each other. For example, in the famous image shown here on the right, people often attempt to determine whether they perceive a rabbit or a duck. Whether it's attempting to figure out whether it's the floppy rabbit ears or the duck's bill, we are looking to find attributes to help us qualify what exactly this object is. And that process we as humans use to make this determination is the basis of what perceptual intelligence is. So in 1948, Claude Shannon made a discovery that is the foundation of technology as we know it today. He determined that the laws of thought and switches are essentially the same thing. So if the laws of thought can somehow be implemented in switches, then he surmised that somehow machines can think. Now, over 70 years later, artificial intelligence and machine learning are critical technologies that are becoming more commonplace in today's modern workplace. With this emerging adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions, Azure's cognitive services provide a set of machine learning algorithms that Microsoft has developed to solve problems in the field of artificial intelligence. So the goal of cognitive services is really to democratize AI by packaging it into discrete components that are easy for developers to use in their own apps. Whether it's web or desktop solutions, developers can consume these algorithms through standard REST calls over the internet to the Cognitive Services API. The Cognitive Services API are grouped into 5 categories. So today you have speech, which are essentially tools that improve speech recognition and identify the speaker. Language, understanding sentences and intent rather than just words. Knowledge, this essentially tracks down research from scientific journals or the web for you to be able to visualize and present in your various applications. Search, this applies to being able to integrate, and within the Microsoft platform, there's the Bing API with essentially your search engines to be able to provide that search results to your application. And the API that we will focus on during this installment, Vision, which is essentially analyzing images and videos for content and other useful information. So as we mentioned, computer vision really is the process of automating human perception. So how can we train computers to do something that we as humans do naturally? Well, computers can perceive data from an image as channels of pixel data. So Azure's Cognitive Services Computer Vision API boosts content discoverability, accelerate text extraction, and create products that more people can use by embedding vision capabilities in your apps. So use visual data processing to help label content, from objects to concepts. We can extract printed and handwritten text. We can recognize familiar subjects like brands or landmarks. And really, we can moderate content. So for instance, as we think about all of those use cases, on a day-to-day basis, we really involve and deal with a lot of these solutions within just common activities in our daily lives. So what Cognitive Services aims to do, particularly with the Computer Vision API, and really some of the other services that you see here, as we presented before, it is really the democratization of AI. What it essentially means is that it's making data and artificial intelligence available to normal data citizens, right? Not your everyday data scientist or data engineer or database administrator, perhaps just a citizen developer someone who wants to utilize the availability of solutions that can help them determine information within text, within images, within languages. Cognitive services provide the ability to help computers analyze vast amount of data to glean patterns and projections. And today there are many different use cases that we can leverage computers to analyze. So for instance, within computer vision, there's image classification. The image classification solution accepts the given input image and produces output classification for identifying a targeted set of images for analysis. So for instance, we can imagine going out on the internet or maybe having a number of images within your organization and trying to isolate perhaps a brand or perhaps a product or object. Image classification helps you do that. The next use case is localization. Localization is essentially solution algorithms where you find the object and draw a bounding box around it, right? So from a perspective of images or even video, it may help you isolate an object, a thing, or maybe even a person. Then there's object detection. It allows you to classify and detect all objects in the image, right? So you can assign a class to each object and draw a bounding box around it. So when you think of object detection, it's a way of maybe isolating or identifying multiple objects and being able to classify that. The next, and I think the one that is probably the most widely known computer vision use case, is facial recognition. And facial recognition is a process of identifying or verifying the identity of a person using their face, right? It captures, analyzes, and compares patterns based on the person's facial details, right? And so the purpose of that is to really identify or capture a person's face. And based on the repository of images that you have, you essentially compare that image that you've captured to maybe a database of other faces and essentially looking to see if there's a match. And again, based on that match, it can be a score as high as 100% to even as low as 0%. But again, it's a way of helping you to determine and isolating and identifying an individual. The next is object segmentation. And this is really something that is very common with marketers today in the modern workplace. It aims to really separate target objects from the background, in other instances on the pixel level. So as we talk about social media and marketers potentially trying to figure out the use of their products, how it's being used, this is one of those common algorithms that you find a lot of marketers using today. The next is metadata extraction. And this is something that we'll see here in our demonstration in a little bit. And what this is the retrieval of any embedded metadata that may be present in a given image. So, as we have done over the last few years, particularly, in organizations who want to store images of whether it's company events or meaningful activities that they've captured within their organization, you try to tag those documents and be able to add specific metadata or keywords to it to help users within your organizations more quickly isolate and identify that data. And the last is object tracking. What this is the process of estimating the state of the target object presented in an image, and then being able to identify information related to that image in previous images, right? So think of this as a way of being able to track the movement of an object. And more likely, this would be something that you would find in a video file, right? Being able to track, just the state of a specific object from frame to frame. So we say all that. The question then is, how does MDS integrate Microsoft's cognitive services with Azure Synapse Analytics? And so what we'll try to do is just explain the Azure Synapse platform and how we're taking the Azure Synapse Analytics platform and really utilizing it as a development platform. And so as we discussed during our last webinar installment, Azure Synapse Studio is the single pane of glass that bring together big data analytics, data development, and data visualizations. And really, while analytics is important, businesses can do more and more complex analytics for better, faster, and more automated insights. This is what Azure Synapse represents today. So whether it's data science and enabling automated insight with a depth and scale beyond the ability of human analysts, or even small businesses today, right? They need scalable analytics, as we mentioned, for social media or digital interaction, or just normal day-to-day data-driven activities. Increasingly, machine learning, artificial intelligence drive autonomous processes and decisions for smart organization, regardless of size. And as we also took a look at last time was Azure Synapse Studio. And as we mentioned, it really is this singular unified place where all data roles, data resources, particularly in a data-driven organization, can begin to come together and collaborate on analytics and machine learning or report writing. Synapse Studio really presents a singular interface where we can perform ingestion, exploration, as we mentioned, analytics. It's a user experience that's very similar to look and feel of Azure Data Factory for those of you who are familiar with it. And of course, as we're talking about being able to work with data, being able to manipulate data, those of you who are also familiar with Azure Data, with Databricks and being able to manipulate data, this is an end-to-end unified experience. So it's not just for the data engineers or the data scientists, but data citizens or citizen developers can feel empowered within this platform as well. So I'll admit, when I initially began using Synapse Studio, I was a little bit uneasy because I assumed I had to learn a brand new tool, right? However, Microsoft really built this UI with users in mind, users who are familiar with Microsoft products. For instance, we mentioned before Azure Data Factory. For those of you who are familiar with Azure Data Factory, you will really find a familiarity with this user experience. And so at its core, it leverages existing capabilities of other data services you already may use within the Azure ecosystem. So as I mentioned, I think the apprehension that I have was quickly set aside, because as you take a look at this new tool, it is very familiar in a lot of ways. So as we kind of talked about some of those services, one of the services that's really key in the solutions that we built is Azure Link Services. So in Azure Synapse Analytics, a link service is where you define your connection information to other services. So think of it this way, and particularly those of you who have a background with ADF or Azure Data Factory, it provides a way to kind of simplify the integration process by storing the connection details in a link service or Azure Key Vault. So for instance, we mentioned connecting to external resources. And in today's case, we're looking to integrate our solution with Instagram. So by leveraging Instagram using the REST API, it essentially is a link service that you can also add. But as we're noting here, there are 85 plus pre-built connectors for data integration with Azure Synapse. So as you see here, there can be Power BI, SAP, Postgres, Snowflake. There are a number of pre-built connectors that you can leverage within your Azure Synapse environment today. The next is Synapse Pipelines. And so with Synapse Studio, you can create complex pipelines that essentially automate and orchestrate data movement, data transformation, and compute activities within your solution. So you can author and monitor these pipelines using Synapse Studio. And of course, this is really critical because again, a lot of the processes that we'll go ahead and conduct within this unified data environment, we may want to automate, right? We may want to schedule. And Synapse Pipeline allows you to be able to do that. So Synapse Notebooks. And for those of you who are familiar with perhaps Jupyter Notebooks, and as we mentioned before, Databricks, as well as Azure Notebooks, Synapse Notebook is very, very familiar. And what a notebook allows the data resource to do is combine ETL, analytics, and machine learning into a singular interface. So it lets you combine markdown text, executable code, persistent data, graphics, and visualization onto a single shareable canvas. And because of this really powerful combination of code, graphics, and explanatory text, Synapse Notebooks, it lends itself really well to some of the other notebooks that you see on the market. As we mentioned before, whether it's Jupyter or Databricks, the fact that you now have this notebook solution within this interface, it really makes the ease of development a lot simpler, right? Because now you can essentially have your report writing, your development, your pipeline creation, all within the same interface. And so whether it's data science instruction, data cleaning, transformation, numerical simulation, statistical modeling, or really the development of machine learning models, you can perform all of these functions right within Synapse using Synapse Notebooks. So today, what we want to do is we really want to kind of take a step through and really show you, particularly our notebook, how we connect it to Instagram, and using the Azure Cognitive Service computer vision API. We want to show how we leverage Python within our notebook to connect to our Instagram API. And then we're able to take the images from Instagram and analyze it using cognitive services to extract metadata. And again, as we mentioned before, this is one of those functions that you really can apply to a lot of the modern use cases, particularly in data-driven organizations. And again, a lot of the solutions that you see today, it's one of those common use cases that's used throughout. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing here for a while, and I will transition over to my browser where we'll begin taking a look at Azure Synapse Studio. Okay, so we're going to start by, again, what you're taking a look at right now is my Azure Synapse Studio UI. And so if we were to actually navigate back to the home and really just kind of get you guys familiar with this again, what we are taking a look at here in the left-hand side is really your tab, right? And so within Synapse Studio, you essentially have the tabs that kind of take you to all of the activities that you really want to perform as, whether it's, we said, a data citizen, data scientist, data engineer. This is a unified platform that gives you the type of functionality that all of those roles would want to be able to conduct within a data-driven enterprise. And so we mentioned previously, there's the ability to kind of develop and create solutions. And as we just showed previously, we were within our notebook environment, and we were essentially looking at how we can develop and attach to it. But within the data tab here, and I'd mentioned before, we have the ability to really kind of link to or add additional information, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to really kind of point out within our Synapse tenant here, we essentially have our SQL pool. So let's just jump there. Give me 1 second. Just going to go back to our workspace. So we have our SQL pool, right? And so what that allows us to do is to be able to connect to our SQL, our data warehouse unit. And this is really more familiar to those who are, familiar with working within a SQL Server environment. This is essentially our SQL Server repository here. And then, of course, really, to me, one of the more exciting things within Synapse is the serverless SQL on demand. So think of it this way: for organizations who perhaps aren't looking to have a full-fledged data warehouse, but are looking to maybe perform just some normal data analytics. Perhaps a serverless DB solution would be something that's a little bit more, apropos for your particular environment. And then the next, we have our Spark. And our Spark pool is really where, from a machine learning standpoint, it's where we conduct most of our transactions and experiments against. Again, we mentioned before that for our notebooks that we're going to take a look at here in a little bit, we're essentially running this against our Spark pool. And the reason being is because most of our experiments that we run within this Synapse Summer solution will be done using Python. So one of the things I wanted to kind of, start out with here, and we mentioned utilizing Python. For those of you who are familiar with it, there are a number of packages that certainly jump out at you. But one of the things that we really wanted to point out is because we are working with images and we wanted to visualize, I would say probably the most critical package here is matplotlib, which we are utilizing to be able to kind of display our image, which we'll see here in a little bit. One of the things I also want to point out too is when we're actually creating our notebook, we can essentially come in here, and I'm just going to go to my Develop tab. And you'll notice here within our Develop tab, there are a number of solutions that we already have listed. So there's our SQL scripts. We have a number of notebooks for various experiments that we're running. And then we also have Power BI. And again, when we kind of talk about whether it's SQL scripts, notebooks, Power BI, you can envision that there's many different roles within an organization, whether it's your data engineer or perhaps database administrator, or with the notebooks, it could be a data scientist or even a data citizen. And then Power BI, right? It can be a report writer, or it can be a power user within a specific department. You now get the understanding that within this singular interface, there are a number of roles within a data-driven organization that would be able to come to this interface and be able to utilize it and be productive. So with that said, I want to navigate back here to our notebook that we were kind of talking about before. And what I did was I opened a couple of the notebooks here. So we have one notebook that we call Cognitive POC, and the other is Instagram Batch. And essentially we're doing, the same thing with both, but I wanted to kind of show, particularly with the Cognitive POC, the fact that we're now within our package, we're essentially connecting to the computer vision endpoint, and within our specific Azure tenant, we're connecting to that API, and then using that API, what we're then going to look to do is we're going to now look to connect to Instagram. And then from Instagram, and for those of you who are familiar with the process of obtaining a token with Instagram, I think today now it's required that you also have to have a Facebook account. So that's certainly something that you should be aware of. And in this case, like we mentioned before, we're utilizing Python to be able to connect to retrieve the data back from our specific Instagram feed. And you'll notice here. And then from our particular connection with cognitive services, we're now getting back the response from the cognitive services within header, and then parameters, as you can see here, whether it's the categories, description, and color. And one of the things we'll certainly do as a follow-up to this is to send out some of the resources. Microsoft has some very, very descriptive white papers and a specific tutorial that aligns with what we're doing here, where we're actually, like I said, connecting to Instagram. But for the most part, what you'll really want to take a look at is being able to utilize the Azure Cognitive Services Computer Vision API, and then within your tenant, being able to instantiate that API and then potentially connect to it within a notebook, or as we mentioned before, it could also be your web application or maybe even a desktop solution. And so as we're saying here, we're now getting that image back. And so within that, the image that we're able to capture, Cognitive Services is also being able to send us back information that it's gleaned from that image. So as we mentioned before earlier, and certainly one of the things that you should think about when we talk about computer vision, right? The whole point of computer vision is to be able to essentially mimic a human action that we perform really naturally on a day-to-day basis. And so the way that computer vision goes about doing that is that it looks at the data, and particularly within an image, it looks at the pixel data and it's able to categorize that based on the information, and in some cases, perhaps the metadata or some of the keywords or terms that's associated to that. So as we kind of see here, right, we're seeing an image, we see a fence, right? We see green grass, we see some people in the distance, the sky. And if we were to go and look through some of the properties that are returned from Azure Cognitive Services, it's telling us the dominant foreground color is green, right? Well, because as we see here, most of the images are really kind of associated within the image. A lot of it is just the green grass, right? And so it's telling you that's the dominant background color. And then it's also giving you the accent color, which here is really just a hex code, and more so that's kind of telling you what the sky is. But you'll notice there are some other things that's associated in here. So right now you'll also see there's tags, and within that there's the grass, keyword, fence, outdoor, green, building, park, sheep, large, field. Again, a lot of this image is just really gleaned from taking the image, using that pixel data, and within Microsoft Cognitive Service, it's able to understand the object, detect it, and then respond back to the caller or essentially the application that was making the request, and respond with the objects that was detected within that particular image. And so as we kind of go forward, we're going to take a look, as we did last time with Twitter, right, which was being able to utilize hashtags to glean textual information. Today, instead of textual information, we're looking at images, and we connected to the Instagram API, and based on images within Instagram, we're able to call out to the Microsoft Cognitive Service and then have Cognitive Services Computer Vision API respond back with information specific to the image we were providing. And so within our next episode, what we're going to do is try to essentially perform a combination of both. We're going to look to have textual information as well as image information, and being able to aggregate that together and try to glean both type of objects in our particular installment. And for that particular installment, we'll be looking at the LinkedIn API. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and then change back to our PowerPoint here. And so just kind of perform a recap of what we conducted and looked at. So we identified that perceptual intelligence is really the bridging of thought patterns and machine learning. Then we really took a look at the Azure Synapse Analytics platform. We identified that it's a complete unified data platform. Then we walk through a singular interface where we're able to integrate Azure services such as cognitive services, computer vision, as well as a third-party API. And as you take a look at all of the solutions that we walk through, the thing that really stands out is that being able to conduct machine learning, AI in today's environment, it's really well suited to maximizing your existing enterprise investment in Azure and Microsoft 365. So what's next? As we mentioned before, we have an upcoming Azure Synapse webinar series, and it's going to be the final installment, like I just mentioned. And we'll also be sending out reference materials. So as I mentioned before, we'll send out the white paper, some of the links that walk you through what we were able to conduct within our specific Synapse notebook. And then we're also asking that if you can, check out our upcoming podcast, where we'll talk a little bit more about Azure Synapse, AI, as well as Microsoft's analytics solutions. And then certainly if you guys wanted to dive in a little bit deeper on how you can leverage whether it's Synapse or some of Microsoft's other, whether it's machine learning or data platform solutions, feel free to reach out to us, where we can certainly walk you through or help you participate in one of our advanced analytics using Azure Synapse workshops. And with that said, I will go ahead and turn it back over to you, Sam.
Hi, yeah, so we actually do have a couple of questions, Pat. The first one is from, it says, is it possible shared notebook for practice? I'm guessing that's when you're talking about the Azure notebooks. Is it possible to share it?
So within a Synapse deployment, and I'm assuming you're talking about within your organization, can you share your notebook with other folks within your organization? Absolutely, you can absolutely do that. So right now, within our advanced analytics teams, we have a number of folks who work on that particular notebook, right? So for instance, we have some folks with some expertise on the Python side who just kind of come in at the end. And then we have some folks who are more familiar with the cognitive service side, who are familiar with the specific packages that we can use. They kind of go in and really kind of start the notebook. But one of the things that's really, to me, I really like about Synapse is the fact that you can have the various roles and be able to give permissions to folks throughout the organizations. And as we mentioned before, there are a number of roles that we highlighted, right? So we can just say, hey, the normal, data citizen, or think of that guy as a power user, right? The person who really kind of just looks to leverage data maybe for, a monthly or semi-monthly report. You can grant that person access to be able to access just a subset of data, maybe work in a notebook, or maybe just give them access to a report. And certainly Synapse lends itself very well to be able to kind of distinguishing permissions to those individuals. And like I said before, with the Synapse notebook, you can certainly share that within a team of folks within your organization. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes. And then the other question we have is, what would you recommend, Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse?
That actually is a very good question. So I will say this. I think I've been spoiled a little bit because I have been working with Synapse now for the last few months. And here's the reason why. Obviously over the last few months, particularly, with the current pandemic, we've had to work in disparate groups. And for our company, it's not just, around the state, it's really around the world, right? And so having this unified platform where a number of individuals, regardless of their role within the organization, that need to access data, having this central singular place where we would be able to have them integrate with that data. And as we mentioned before with the last question, right, being able to share it, right, being able to provide that data, whether it's, like we said, Data Factory or a notebook. And the way I look at Data Factory, my background is within productivity and building workflows. I look at whether it's Azure Data Factory, or Synapse pipelines, is what essentially is a representation of Azure Data Factory in Synapse. Kind of the same way, right? I'm building workflows, and within that, I'm really aggregating a bunch of components and activities together. However, the benefit with Synapse is you get to actually work with all of these other things that's a part of your data ecosystem in one singular environment. And again, not having that role maybe down the hall or maybe a couple floors below you. Now they're somewhere else, and managing a disparate workforce can be a bit challenging. I find that Synapse has made that very easy to be able to do going forward. And so that's why I say I'm a little bit spoiled now, because to be quite frank, all of my data functions, all of my data needs, I'm able to work and perform within the Synapse UI. So hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. And then just the last few questions. We will be sharing the presentation after this. That's what part of the reference materials that we will be sending out. But I just want to obviously confirm, Patrick, that the notebook that you were discussing, you'll also share that, or is that something that we're not allowed to?
I don't believe the notebook itself will be able to share, but we'll be able to certainly send out the tutorial that kind of guides on building that information.
Okay, perfect. So those were the last two questions, and you should be receiving an email from me. My name is Samantha, by tomorrow with that information. If you don't receive it, you can obviously reach out, and we can just make sure that it goes through to your email. So those were the rest of the questions. And yeah, so we want to thank you all for joining us. You can follow us on social media. We'll continue to update relevant information about Azure Synapse, our podcast, and any of the other Microsoft products. So you'll definitely see that. And our monthly newsletter goes out once a month, and that will also have some relevant information. Perfect. And if anyone has any questions that come up after this, you can definitely feel free to reach out to us. All right. Well, thank you all, and you get a few minutes back into your day, and stay safe.